Isabel Brown, our friend, how, with all these issues, with everything that's going on, with the deck stacked against Gen Z, how the hell are they going to save America?
It's an important question, and one that's hard to answer in one sentence, but
you have multiple sentences.
To explain this a bit further, I think it's fascinating that the reason I wrote this book over the last several years is I've been asked to be a bit of a token voice for Generation Z in politics and in media. I've worked for the U.S. Senate, I worked in the White House, I've worked with tons of different political nonprofits, and so I'm often asked to be the voice of our generation. And typically when I go on podcasts or largely mainstream media, Fox News or CNN, or do some print media with Newsweek or radio with NPR, I've heard the exact same monotonous, unanimous narrative about Generation Z, which is Gen Z is destroying America, that it's our generation's fault that we're struggling with anxiety and depression. It's our fault that nobody knows what gender is. It's our fault that what's happening at the border is happening and that crime is so terrible in inner cities, that nobody can talk to each other and we're so politically divisive today. And if you just stop and think about that for half a second, most of us are still children ourselves. We're still teenagers and preteens. So somebody had to raise us in this world, and somebody had to make that inverted flip into the upside down, which I think regardless of where you fall politically, it's inarguable to say that we are in a very confusing time in America as we're coming into adulthood. Literally, there is no distinguishable difference between good and evil, and depending on who you ask is going to have a completely different answer. Men are not distinguishable from women. We have members of the Supreme Court of the United States who cannot answer the question, what is a woman? You're watching children be taught they should pee in litter boxes in current middle school and high school classrooms all across the country.
Full disclosure, I only pee in litter boxes.
Good, I'm glad we got that out of the way. It's behind the set, you guys, in case you're
wondering. Come on, guys. Just accept people for who they are.
But it's a scary reality, and yet the finger from every generation older than us has been pointed at Gen Z saying, this is your fault. I've been working in content creation and on high school and college campuses for the last 5 to 6 years. And I knew that that wasn't true, but that message somehow really isn't getting translated to those older than us, which is one of the reasons I decided to write this book. What you're watching happen, and I alluded to this earlier, but culturally with Gen Z, is this pendulum swing unlike anything anybody saw coming, culturally speaking, and we'll talk about politics too, to rebel against this rigid authoritarian leftism, against our secular society, against subjective morality and no sense of objective truth, and to instead yearn for timeless, traditional, very conservative, culturally values that have always made Western civilization great. So that's manifesting in a million different ways. 93% of our generation still wants to get married in a time that marriage has been all out erased from society, easily demonized, and we have the lowest marriage rate in American history currently. We're realizing we shouldn't be spending $250,000 on a degree in, I don't know, underwater lesbian basket weaving, because that's not going to be something successful for our careers after we graduate. I have no doubt that's a real degree.
Amy, you don't like that class?
Because I got into a big debate with Streamer Destiny about college, and he was like, just don't go to school for basket weaving, you're fine. But I've never heard of underwater lesbian basket weaving.
It's the Gen Z version. And I have no doubt that's a real class somewhere, just knowing what I know about campuses.
I don't doubt it.
You touch on a few things, traditional American values. We've covered this on the show umpteen times. The Wall Street Journal expose about the decline in traditional American values, you know, having a family, raising children, community service, religion, all plummeting. The only thing that is actually a little bit of an uptick is money. Would you say you're a conservative? Would you say you're a traditionalist? Are you a libertarian? How would you define yourself?
I'm very politically conservative, and I think that stems from all of the religious and cultural values that I have as well. To finish off some of those examples for our generation at large, 62% of us have already started our own businesses because we're realizing we don't want to be an unpaid CEO or an unpaid intern to a woke CEO in San Francisco or New York who is offering to pay for an abortion out of state but not better maternity leave. So we'd rather just be CEO on day one. We're quitting our hormonal birth control from across the political spectrum at large as a generation, so much so that the Washington Post totally freaked out about this the other day and blamed it all on right-wing QAnon influencer propaganda instead of our generation reading the side effects of birth control on the box and saying we don't want to be taking this anymore. And so you're watching this cultural revolution happen, and it was the late, great Andrew Breitbart that was famous for saying politics is downstream from culture. That if you want to start changing what's happening in the Oval Office or the halls of Congress, you have to first start by changing how people are living their day-to-day life. I am a very conservative Gen Zer, but I think even if we wouldn't necessarily label ourselves politically conservative right now, that is the trajectory we are going in, largely because of these lifestyle choices and cultural values we're embracing in defiance of those older than us every day.
So, and by the way, Malik, pull up this article. I'm going to reference it from The Hill in a second. I'll tell you when to pull it up. I think it's the last thing I sent you. The progressives, the AOCs of the world, the Rashida Tlaibs of the world, the Ariana Presleys of the world, the Bernie Sanders of the world.
That's pretty good. That was impressive.
Yeah, you understand that 50% of retirees are retiring with no money saved? I always find that funny. I feel like they have a major voice. Our friend Aaron here is a progressive. Our friend Pixie is a progressive. Their role, their task is to sort of marry progressive thought leaders and influencers with progressive politicians, grassroots campaign. So as a progressive, what do you think of progressives in general? And then I'll let her respond to what you have to say.
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that word progressive, and most young people attach themselves to that word, I think historically in America, because it's easy to envision a better society for everybody, right? There's important buzzwords that the left is strategically using through all of those pillars of culture that I've already mentioned that they've taken over to create this allegedly utopian society, right? We're so diverse, we're so inclusive, we're so progressive, we're so effective.
Our diversity is
we're
our
so
strength.
Rich.
Isabel.
Diversity is our strength,
Yeah.
right? These are all things that we hear on our college campuses, from influencers, on social media and the mainstream media, certainly from some of the politicians that you just mentioned. And yet we've been building that for decades at this point in America. And where are we? We're at easily the most divided time in modern history, by far.
Yeah.
We literally can't have conversations about 90% of the social issues happening in our country because we've been strategically taught, always avoid people who think differently from you, and hate speech will literally kill you. You just can't even stand to be in a room with somebody spewing
Don't
such
hurt
hateful
anybody's feelings now,
ideology.
Isabel.
It's a scary time.
Yeah.
And amazingly, 2024 looks a whole lot more like 1984 than this flying cars, utopian, successful future. We are being censored more than ever before. We are hopeless for the future more than ever before. We have lack of trust in our public institutions more than ever before. So progressives have been at the helm of this culturally and politically for a while, but nothing has actually progressed in society. It's regressing. So to be truly progressive, I think you have to start evaluating, okay, what are my values? What do I believe in? What do I stand for? Dave Rubin is famous for saying, you can't be a Democrat, but you don't necessarily have to be a Republican today. There's a whole movement happening in America realizing the Democrat Party that calls themselves progressive is not really progressing anything, and they certainly don't espouse classically liberal values today.
So, Aaron, here's your chance to respond. By the way, respect to you. You have a whole book on it, Proofs in the Pudding. Aaron, you've done your research. You know your stuff. It's not like you're some lightweight, but you get a lot of heat from certain conservative pundits on progressive values. Where do you stand on what she has to say, and what do you stand for?
I think we definitely agree on the fact that Gen Z, like our predecessors as a young generation, were rebellious, but I think we're rebellious in more innovative ways and ways that our forefathers and previous generations weren't. We want to have, there's an emphasis on individuality. There's a lot of independent thought, and I think that's why you're seeing this divergence. Like on the last show, we looked at how there are Gen Z men are identifying as like conservative or Republican, and Gen Z women are more often identifying as like liberal or Democrat.
Yeah.
They usually use like party.
Malik, you can pull that article up.
They usually use party affiliation as kind of like a proxy, but when you look at like the policies, what?
Measles.
That's definitely not it.
We'll get it right
Keep
next
going.
time.
Yeah.
When you look at the policies, there's widespread support among Gen Z, both men and women, for policies like Medicare for all, for free state college tuition, for more strength in unions, and there is ideological agreement. But I do think that you see that rebelliousness because more Gen Zs probably identify as independent rather than just strict conservative or Democrat.
Yep.
But as far as I can see, Gen Z is trending pretty progressive. So I'm really surprised that like the thesis of your book is that you see them as going to like save America and take it towards like Christian and more conservative, when all the stats that I'm seeing show that like Gen Z is more secular, they're more progressive, that they want to embrace the left's vision for America, more progressive ideals rather than like returning to traditional values.
You used a word there that I loved, independent, and that's exactly what's happening, particularly with the younger cohort of our generation. So those that are first-time registered voters going into November, 53% of them are registering as independent with a capital I. They are saying, my vote does not blindly belong to you, either party. And there is a huge renaissance of critical thinking in the political space and with these political policies that nobody really saw coming, because I think we've all talked so much about indoctrination and groupthink and all of these things in politics and in academia over the last several years. In rebellion of those trying to get us all to think exactly the same way, we're saying, hang on a second, I want to ask more questions about who's running for president, and do I really agree with that? Do I agree with this mainstream opinion on abortion? Do I agree with this thing I was just taught on gender ideology in my psych class? Let's think a little bit more critically about that. And so that independent voter base is absolutely growing. If you study exit polling from the last several elections in 2018, 2020, and 2022, the graph looks like a perfect diagonal line. If you remember high school algebra, the sample y equals mx plus b graph, towards more conservative politicians, policies, ballot initiatives, etc. And when you hear this overwhelming narrative, Gen Z is so progressive, they want this and that and this and that, it's a whole lot more nuanced than 99% of the things you're seeing in the mainstream media. A great example is abortion. I think everybody on the left is expecting Gen Z to vote to codify Roe v. Wade going into November and codify just abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason. That's what's being asked from the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration of this group of young voters. You can look at a poll and see Gen Z supports abortion in the majority, but 9 in 10 voters under the age of 45 support at least some restrictions on abortion, which is a dramatically different picture than what the White House and the Biden campaign is trying to paint for America. No rules, anything goes, just do whatever you want. And so I'm loving that independent renaissance of thought, of critical thinking, because it's allowing us not just to say, my vote belongs to this party, I consider myself this color on my voter registration, but to ask about objective truth, about values for our country, to paint a picture of where we're going that isn't necessarily tied to whoever the most powerful person in the party is at that time.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. If you like that one, click right here to watch the full SOSCAST, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.